is that more and more mainstream scientists have come out and said that they have concluded that this is probably a simulation. And once you go down the simulation hypothesis, as they call it, all these kind of mysteries of life that the mainstream of science, so-called explanation for reality, can't answer, suddenly the simulation hypothesis does. And so all these subjects come together. The one thing you realize, again, you go back to the analogy of the jigsaw puzzle. You can see life as individual pieces and individual happenings and individual organizations, individual events. And if you do that, everything seems random and bewildering. Like, why is this happening? And why is that happening? And why do they do it like that when it's obviously better like that? But when you connect the dots, when you connect the apparently random, you see the tapestry in which everything connects. And the what I call the global cult, this network of secret societies, which is driving human society a bit, from the shadows. The reptilian aspect and the non-human aspect is not all reptilian, and the simulation and all of that. It all comes together into a coherent whole. And from that perspective, life and human society take on a very, very different perspective. But of course, finally, we are a human race that is imprisoned by our manipulated perceptions, and we are imprisoned by what we call normal. So people in general, it's changing. More and more people are awakening to this now. Hallelujah. But people filter and judge everything from their sense of normal. So what is normal? Normal is only what we are normally told is normal and what we normally experience. It doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't have to be true, but it's normal. It's what normally happens. And so when you do things like me, which is I'm interested not in a statue or a round of applause. I'm interested in what the hell is going on. You follow the information. And that information, if you follow it and you don't censor because you fear what other people think, another prison that people live in massively, it's going to take you way beyond what I call the postage stamp consensus, which is this narrow band of normal that we're told to believe in. And when you go beyond the postage stamp consensus, which is taught in the schools and is promoted by the media, etc., then the perception of normal is going to perceive you as completely bonkers and completely insane. And what is he on? And when you do what I do, you do it in the knowledge that that's going to happen. Like people said to me over the years, when you started talking about reptilians, did you not think that you'd get laughed at? Well, of course, I'd worked that out. I'd worked that out. But the point is the information justified by what I'm experiencing and what I'm seeing and who I'm talking to and the experiences they tell me about? If it's yes, I'm going to say it anyway, because what happened to me fundamentally was so fundamentally important. When I started, after my massive awakening, shall we say, and I started saying some strange things in 1990, and I'd been a television presenter, so obviously it was all in the news that this was going on. I knew that what I was going to say was going to get what happened, but I did it anyway. And I went through in Britain over a wider part of the world now, but in Britain, a extraordinarily historic level of ridicule. I couldn't go down any street in Britain without being laughed at. If I turned around when people walked past me, I knew they'd be laughing. And what that did was clear me of the prison that most people live in, which has been essential for the rest of my life to this point. And that's the fear of what other people think. Because once you break out of that prison of censoring yourself and fearing the reaction of others to what you're saying, what you're obviously going to do is censor what you're saying. And so that cleared me out. You can, when you go through that level of ridicule, you either disappear from the world and hide, or you have the experience and you allow it to be the fire that hones the steel. And so all the stuff, because I didn't know at the time I had that massive ridicule, that just a few years down the line I'd be talking about shape-shifting reptilians. I mean, hello, you what? But
And
because
yet,
of the
here we are
experience,
in your
because of the
first
experience,
space.
what's that?
I said, and here we are in your
Yeah,
first space with a massive audience
yeah,
that's
and I
ready
just
to hear these things.
yeah, and just to finish that point, and then I'll shut up. um, the
No problem.
the that experience of the mass ridicule, it cleared me out of that fear of what other people think. Because if it hadn't, then I mean, would I have been talking about some of the things I'm talking about? Some of the things I'll talk about tonight? No, probably not. But it did happen, and so I am.
Well, thank you. That was a great introduction. I'd like to introduce Mr. Sasha Stone. Sasha, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hi, I'm very happy to be here, and never ever happier than when I'm just sitting back listening to David.
Yeah,
And
he's great.
well, I'll tell you why. Because I've known David for many years, and what I can attest is that in all the years that I've known David personally, and preceding that by a decade when I had heard of him but not known him personally, he has never once skipped a beat. Never once skipped a beat. And meaning to say that every single thing he's ever said is anchored in the most pure syntax. And that's the only way nowadays you know that you're dealing with the flame of pure truth. And for me, it's a beautiful thing because it's an orchestra of pure truth and right action. And I regard David as as the icebreaker, the perennial icebreaker. But I also want to speak a little bit to the common understanding of David. I mean, obviously, there's a tremendous amount of prophecy there. A prophet is never welcomed in their own home as a rule of thumb. And for sure, since the Wogan show back in the day, which I was watching live, that was very much how it played out. There was a man who was moving 180 degrees against the entirety of the accepted conceptual framework of reality, a lone voice. And I remember watching that show and thinking, he's mad as a fucking snake, but there was an angelic presence about him. And I kind of then put myself into suspension and allowed myself simply to be taken in the days ahead and months ahead and years ahead with how David's voice led the framing of truth, which led to disclosure, which leads to revelation. And so the prophet bit in David is for me an absolute science. He's proven it out. And the bit that I find fascinating about David is he's more of a scientist, as much of a scientist as he is um, a prophet in that sense. And of course, one uses these words, a little advisedly, but he's a scientist in as much as he has deduced the fabric of reality into a digestible and understandable framing where great iconic figures like Terence McKenna with his Time Wave Zero and David Bohm and Richard Feynman and even to some extent that wonderful old crook Timothy Leary, guys who themselves were on the frontiers of exploring the quantum domain. They wrote books and theses and delivered keynote lectures all around the world. And yet, David Icke stumbles in, and he, in a few simple choice sentences, is able to deduce the quantum mathematical complex into something which Joe Public can understand. Now, that is a huge accomplishment. It's a monstrous accomplishment in the positive sense. So I just invite folks to remember that David's work is correlating prophecy, and when I say prophecy, I'm talking there's biblical prophecy encoded in much of what he said. There's Hopi rainbow prophecy in, encoded in a lot of what he said, and that is how we navigate reality, by being anchored into this quantum domain. You play the role of a truther nowadays, and especially 30 years ago when David began. I'm 9 years entered the frame 9 years after he did. But I know that even when I entered the frame in the late 1990s, there was still no handrail, baby. There was no parachute. It was you're on your own and you are moving so against the framework of reality. Don't expect to make any friends anytime soon. But I'll tell you where the intersect is between myself and David, and is that I had been for a number of years involved at a pretty high level of in interacting with royalty and with high echelon people, sort of AAA celebrity, Hollywood rock and roll, and pouncing around in that arena. And what happened was I started hearing stories from folks at that level that dovetailed absolutely with what David Icke was endeavoring to reveal through his writings at that time, which were being mocked mercilessly. And when I first met David, I think it was at my home in London in 2007. I think he was a bit guarded about me, but if quite rightly, actually. But I remember we sat down for, I don't know, it must have been 5 or 6 hours nonstop, and I was telling him things that correlated and corresponded to, from the inside, from behind the palace gates, so to speak, corroborating stuff that he'd been writing about. So for me, that was a very interesting dovetail, and so it's gone on. Now David's now become this figure where he's almost broken into the mainframe, and for certain, there's no question in my mind, in the next 18 months to 2 years, he will be in the mainframe. But enough of that. I just love the fact that David has broken the ice as it relates to scalar, torsion, and fractal science. And let me end by saying this, that his coming out back in the day on that Wogan appearance, claiming to be the Son of God, was entirely correct in the absolute flame and atom seed of pure truth. He was indeed the Son of God, as indeed all of us are the Son of God. But he was seeing in a perfect quantum state of prophecy that he was inseparable to Alpha Omega. He was a direct conduit to God, and he had no choice but to sacrifice his security, his profession, his reputation on that line. And everyone can learn from that story. I'll leave it at that.
Yes, thank you, Sasha. I'm going to introduce Chris Sky for his brief intro, and then Sasha, I'd love to hand the forum over to you, and the other panelists can just start, talking, and that would be great. I'm all ears. I love listening to this stuff, so this is very exciting for me. Chris, are you there?
Hey guys, how's everyone doing today?
Good, good. I am familiar with your breakout monologue that went viral, which was so prophetic. Everything you said just happened in regards to all the shutdowns and stuff. And now here you are. So if you want to briefly tell us your journey to this point, that would be awesome.
Well, I was awake for many, many years. I'm 40 years old now, so I've been kind of in tune with everything that was going on for 20, 30 years. And just like David said, I was always at the anticipation that we were going to have some kind of awakening in the world, or we were going to be enslaved. But as usual, good usually triumphs over evil. And as David is so eloquent at basically taking some of the most complicated things in the world and breaking them down into ways that people can understand, identify with, and even apply to their daily lives, I just simplified it further. To me, as soon as I saw them making their move with COVID, I knew this was their big play for their one world government and all the rest of the stuff that we're seeing. So to me, it came down to good versus evil, right versus wrong. It's that simple. And David was the one that taught me how powerful truth is. And he taught me to use truth as the ultimate weapon and the ultimate way to unite people and the ultimate way to try to trigger that global awakening. And that's basically what I've been doing. I've been going all around the world and I've just been telling the truth. And it's not easy to do that because there's generally consequences for people to tell the truth, especially in today's day and age. So it's not as easy as people think. And David knows that, Sasha knows that, and anybody else who tells the truth to try to get people to wake up understands that. But at the same time, there is nothing more powerful than the truth. When people hear you tell the truth, they can feel it. And the truth is the way that we can unite people while they try to divide us in every way possible. And I believe the final battle is coming soon, and that battle is going to be for our children. And we're seeing that every single agenda, whether it's COVID, climate change, the LGBT agenda, the wars, the children are the ones that are impacted the most and the most negatively. And this is all by design. Because if they can weaken and take control of the next generation and they can obliterate objective truth and they can intimidate anybody from even telling the truth, well, they can have a stranglehold on the world like never before. But that's why people like us exist. That's why people like you are listening, because it's up to us to use the truth, to wake people up, and to get people to do the right thing, even when it's not easy, even when it's not popular, and even when there could be consequences for their actions.
Yes, absolutely. It's always a challenge to fight against what I call consensus reality. And the bigger the consensus, the more of a fight it always is. Real quick, I wanted to mention that David Icke's Wi-Fi has dropped out, and his team, they're working on bringing him back into the space, but we can just hold and talk. So Sasha, if you want to take the forum and begin to talk about what you know about the reptilian agenda to enslave humanity and what we can do to resist it.
Sure. I'll start by saying resistance is futile. So, and actually, I actually mean that. I'm not being churlish because the wise man learns ultimately that there is no escaping from the matrix. There is only a perfect nesting into the atom seed of the center of the matrix. That's your escape route. If you want an escape route, you've got to move back into total phase coherence with God, with Alpha Omega, with source consciousness, with the universal mind. And that means that you have to withdraw from the sensory world. You've got to withdraw from the 3D material world, but you have to withdraw consciously, not by being stoned and smoking dope or by filtering out reality and becoming numb. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about becoming fully actualized in the heat of the flame of the false light reality. And despite that, learn how to withdraw psycho emotional attachment and adherence to false light. So the prophets have all been unified in one premise over the millennia, and that is their clarion call for humanity to not fall victim to idolatry. Moses did it coming down Mount Sinai and seeing the Baal worshippers around the golden calf and freaked out. And Jesus saw money emerging as the new idol and to overturn the money lenders' tables. And Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, broke into the Kaaba in Mecca in his day and trashed all the idols that were assembled inside the Kaaba and destroyed the Banat Allah. Now, anyone in the Islamic world knows what I'm saying. It's very important. Their prophet was against idolatry. The prophet of the Jews was against idolatry. The prophet of the Christians was against idolatry. What do we idolize? Well, today we idolize the parent corporation, which moves somewhere between Pornhub and Netflix normally. So we're talking about false light addiction, adherence to adrenalized reality, which is not premised in anything organic. It's not connected to our divine, immanent, innate nature. So we've become indentured into false light. And even today, given what's happening on the screen with Palestine, Israel, that's a dialectic that's being played out. That's an apocalyptic, predictively programmed Armageddonist scenario being played out in Technicolor precisely in order to adrenalize us, to get us to affix our psycho-emotional identification either to Israel or to Palestine, or somewhere in between. And so long as we are putting our attention onto one or the other of these dialectics, rather like, in Republican, Democrat, all of these different arguments and dialectics that are constantly being afflicted onto us. The idea is to get us to put our attention. Attention equates to life force. Attention is actually plasma. It's prana. It's life force streaming through the dielectric universe and the paramagnetic earth up through the kundalini of the human being, activating in the pineal, fusing into the corona, the lenses of the eyes and the third eye, and then affixing as attention onto something, an object, an idea, Palestine, Israel. And so long as we are focusing on those icons, those totems, those symbols, those narratives, we are the ones manifesting them into manifestation, into animation, because they only exist because of life force that is surrendered by good humans. Now, when we get that piece, we learn to withdraw psycho-emotional attention to false light reality. We are no longer participating in the kingdom of the devil. We can now instead set our ideation onto building the kingdom of heaven on earth, or establishing a new earth horizon, as I'm doing with a noble team. But the point is, we are creators. And we need to reclaim soul sovereignty, step back from the indentureship, dismantle in the entirety of government, the parent corporation, the high street, the false light matrix, return back to the living soil, reconvene relationship with the earth and the creatures of the earth. Fellowship of man is the true currency. Everything else is Luciferianism and false light. That's my ultimate message, and it's always going to come back to that. You and me in the here and now, and how we choose to step away from false light and engage fellowship.